Americans for Fair Taxation presents the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, President of Americans for Fair Taxation, and recorded by Bob Paxton, a volunteer with the Florida FAIRtax Educational Association. And now, this week's Chairman's Report.
Hello, I'm Bob Paxton with the AFFT Chairman's Report for Friday, August 5th, 2022. Let's really save Social Security and Medicare. Enact the FAIRtax. Of the 70 million Americans now receiving Social Security and Medicare benefits, very few of them read the summary of the 2022 annual reports published by the Social Security and the Medicare Board of Trustees. Now, this summary makes the following points. The Old Age and Survivors Insurance, or OASI Trust Fund, which pays retirement and survivors benefits, will be able to pay scheduled benefits on a timely basis until the year 2034. At that time, the fund's reserves will become depleted and continuing tax income will be sufficient to pay just 77% of scheduled benefits. It also says the Hospital Insurance Trust Fund, or Medicare Part A, which helps pay for services such as inpatient hospital care, will be able to pay scheduled benefits until 2028. At that time, that fund's reserves also become depleted, and continuing total program income will be sufficient to pay just 90% of the total scheduled benefits. Now, of course, these projections were calculated based on lower inflation estimates, and the actual inflation we're experiencing now will shorten the above estimates. In addition, the estimates don't tell us how long they can continue to pay the lesser amounts. Can Social Security pay 77% for 5 years or just 1 year? It's anticipated that when the trust funds are no longer able to pay 100% of scheduled benefits, any shortfalls will be paid out of the U.S. budget. However, that's not guaranteed. In a blog post for AEI, Mark Warshawski believes the problem is far worse than the report shows. Here's his conclusion. As bad as recent experience has been, the draw from Medicare and Social Security is projected to get much larger in the next decade as the baby boom generation continues to retire and grow old and health care costs rise. Chart 3 shows the trustees' projections, including the assumption that the HI and OASI trust fund deficits will be filled by general revenue transfers past their projected exhaustion dates. The draw on the federal budget nearly doubles from 2.16% of GDP in 2022 to 4.04% of GDP in 2035 and up to 4.37% in 2040. Stated another way, the federal budget responsibility for Medicare and Social Security alone from general revenues will be as large as the relatively bad government deficit year, with no consideration for other government programs, new or old. Now, of course, the Supreme Court has ruled in Fleming versus Nestor that Social Security benefits are not guaranteed. It's up to Congress to pay those benefits, and it's possible that when the trust funds run out of money, there could be limits on future Social Security and Medicare payments. Congress to the rescue? Well, we'll see. On June 9th, 2022, the Social Security Expansion Act was introduced in the U.S. House and Senate. An article in Forbes did an analysis of the proposed legislation. They found that wages above $250,000 annually would be taxed at the same rate that workers currently pay in FICA taxes, that's 12.4%. This cutoff would not be adjusted for inflation, so as soon as the existing earnings ceiling exceeds this level, all wages would be taxed. But above the earnings ceiling, workers would pay taxes without earning additional benefits. Households with earnings above $200,000 single or $250,000 for joint filers, again unadjusted for inflation, they would pay the tax of 12.4% on their investment earnings, similar to the additional Medicare tax implemented to fund Obamacare. Active S-corporation officers and limited partners would pay taxes at the combined highest Social Security plus Medicare rate, 15.65%. Social Security benefits will be increased by $200 a month. A minimum benefit of 125% of the single-person poverty rate will be established. A more generous CPI index will be adopted, and benefits for the children of disabled or deceased workers will continue up to age 22 rather than 18 for full-time students. It's also increasingly clear that the old notion that Social Security must be contributory because people won't stand for a welfare program for the middle class really no longer holds in many ways. And it's estimated that the new funding sources will increase the viability of the Social Security and Medicare systems for another 75 years. Now, while the proposed legislation may have little chance of being passed now, Congress is being forced to confront the fact that the Social Security Medicare system is underfunded. Now, this underfunding problem is greatly increased by inflation, and it's just going to keep getting worse. It's projected that the 2022 cost of living adjustments for Social Security recipients will result in an 8% increase in the benefits that recipients are currently receiving. Since the COLA adjustments for 2020 and 2021 were just 3% each, this is a huge change. If inflation continues to drive benefits higher, this will dramatically shorten the amount of time that Social Security and Medicare have before the trust funds are depleted. The big lie. Americans are catching on to the fact that what comes out of D.C. these days just simply cannot be trusted. The D.C. elites make promises that sound good but are just not grounded in reality. The numbers they use to support their proposed programs are often wildly inaccurate. And unfortunately, this proposed legislation to strengthen Social Security and Medicare makes statements that are just not true. This legislation promises that benefits will go up, the Social Security Medicare system will become solvent, and only the more affluent will pay. Now that sounds good, but there's just no way that's going to happen that way. Now, no doubt there are computer models somewhere that say that's the way it'll be, but again, those computer models are not reality. Missing from those models is the inevitable human reaction to these higher taxes. People aren't going to just pay these new taxes and accept a lower standard of living as a result. If a business owner has to pay an additional $15,650 in taxes, he's going to try to find a way to keep his net income at or near the same levels as before. That means he'll have to work harder, reduce his expenses like cutting his payroll, or increase his prices. If he increases prices, who pays for that increase? Well, obviously it's the people who buy his products or services. It's amazing how many people never seem to catch on to the fact that when businesses have to pay more in taxes, the extra money invariably comes out of each individual's pocket. In addition, if this proposal becomes law, there will be a number of people who will decide that they will just make just under the $250,000 threshold. They may just cut back on their work or in some cases create real or imagined deductions to reduce their income below that threshold. This is the big lie, that somehow if someone else is paying the income payroll taxes, that it has no effect on everyone else. Now here's the FAIRtax solution. There's absolutely positively no question that the FAIRtax will result in economic growth that's unimaginable under the income tax. Jobs will be created. The demand for labor will significantly increase, resulting in higher wages for more workers. The booming economy will result in a stronger and more stable revenue stream for the federal government. Now, since the FAIRtax legislation specifically sets aside a certain percentage of FAIRtax revenue for Social Security and Medicare, more money flowing into the federal treasury means more money for these two programs. Now, currently, the only people supporting Social Security and Medicare are wage earners who are working for a paycheck and paying the payroll taxes. The ultra-rich, who make their money largely from their investments, pay little to nothing to support Social Security and Medicare. The FAIRtax changes that. With the FAIRtax, everyone whose spending rises above the poverty level will be contributing to Social Security and Medicare. And with everyone contributing, the future solvency of Social Security and Medicare is assured. There's no big lie. If Social Security payments need to be increased, everyone can easily calculate how much the FAIRtax rate must be increased in order to generate the additional money needed to pay the higher benefits. And those increased costs will not be hidden from us. They'll be clearly shown on every retail receipt. In addition, under the FAIRtax, a family of four spending $30,000 a year will pay no FAIRtax out of their own pocket. The prebate will reimburse them for all of the FAIRtax collected from them at the cash register. But under the present income payroll tax system, that same family will pay $2,295 in payroll taxes. Now, to make matters worse, not only does the present system reduce this family's spendable income, it forces them to pay 12 to 20% more for everything they buy because the hidden costs of the income payroll tax system are being passed along to them on every purchase they make. In conclusion, one of the things we value most is honesty. We want to be able to trust those with whom we interact. If we go to a store that promises no question refunds, but they refuse to refund a purchase, we just won't go back to that store. The fair tax is as honest as a tax system can be. There are no hidden costs embedded in the prices we pay. The full amount you're paying in federal taxes is clearly shown on every retail receipt. By treating everyone equally with no exemptions, deductions, or loopholes, the fair tax will make it harder for politicians to pit one income group against another. People, not politicians, will decide how much tax they pay. It's expected that many wealthier people will pay much more in federal taxes under the fair tax than under the present income payroll tax system, but again, that's their choice based on what they purchase. Under the fair tax, it's we the people who control what we pay in federal taxes, not the D.C. elites who dishonestly tell us that we'll be getting benefits that somebody else is going to pay for. With the fair tax, we will take back control over our government and our lives. We'll know what the federal government is costing us, and that will enable us to make better decisions. Now, isn't that the way the government's supposed to work? As noted earlier, the fair tax will trigger an enormous economic boom, which will result in an unprecedented uptick in federal revenues. This, in turn, should create a real debate on what to do with the increased revenue. Do we reduce the fair tax rate? Do we use the extra money for more government spending? Or maybe even start paying down our enormous national debt? The income payroll tax system is broken. It's no longer working. We can't repair it, but we can replace it with a fair tax. Americans must join us before it's too late and the wonderful country we all love is further harmed. Join us and take back control of our country, not with bullets, but with the elimination of one of the biggest threats to our liberty and economic prosperity, the income payroll tax. We should all remember Edmund Burke's warning that applies to our efforts to take back control. Nobody made a greater mistake than he who did nothing because he could only do a little. We should also remember this quote from George Orwell's 1984, which, if we do nothing, may foretell your and your children's future. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. So, what can each of us do? We can write letters and make calls to our elected representatives and attend Zoom town hall meetings demanding that if they really want to allow Americans to take back control, the first step is to eliminate the income payroll tax system and enact the fair tax. Take back control. Help us pass the fair tax. The IRS will be gone and we'll pay our taxes when we make purchases. We, not the ruling class and their minions in D.C., will decide how much federal tax we pay, and we'll know how much tax we're paying because taxes will no longer be hidden from us. They'll be clearly shown on every retail receipt. If you have friends who don't know about the fair tax, send them to fairtax.org. Have them watch the whiteboards under how it works, and if they agree, ask them to please join us. Then, contact your members of Congress and the President and demand that Congress pass the fair tax, the only truly fair tax.
This has been the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, President of Americans for Fair Taxation. Check back every week for news and information about the fair tax, and learn why the fair tax should replace our antiquated federal income tax system. If you'd like to receive a copy of the Chairman's Report in your inbox every week, sign up at fairtax.org.